Okay, so a couple of days ago, I released a video shot in a cinematic style using GoPro's Mission 1 Pro. So if you haven't watched that, this tutorial is going to relate to that. There's a link up here, I think, where you can go and watch it, and then you can come back to this tutorial afterwards. So in this video, I'm going to show you how you can use GoPro's Mission 1 Pro to get better shots for your travel videos and for your vlogs, and how to use its various capabilities to the maximum and to your advantage. There's a lot to go into, and I'm going to split this up into two videos. This one, I'm going to go into the camera and how to compose your shots. And in the next one, I'm going to talk about the editing and grading. So what makes something cinematic? Personally, I don't really like that phrase because the term cinematic means so many things to so many different people. Some people think it's about wide expansive vistas, some people think it's about camera movement, others think it's about lighting, but it can be all of those things and none of them. The thing is that the term cinematic does get attention on YouTube because people search for it, hence the reason that I used it in the video that I produced. But for me personally, cinematic isn't about the camera you use, it isn't about log profiles, it isn't about drone shots or fancy camera moves. It's about the whole process from shooting all the way through to editing. In order to make something or have something come across as cinematic, you need to have that mindset all the way through. And that's why you can end up with some really great footage, but the final video won't seem cinematic because it hasn't been edited with that mindset. Likewise, you can have fly-on-the-wall documentary-style footage that's edited together in a cinematic way, and that appears more cinematic even though it's using handheld camera work. So it is in your mindset, and I'm going to be emphasizing this a lot throughout this video. And so that means that when you're filming or taking your shots, you need to be thinking about how your editing is going to work. Have that visualization in mind as to the kind of music you might have, the kind of flow that you're going to have in the edit, and how it's going to go together. You don't have to be absolutely precise, but having some idea of what the final thing is going to look like is going to go a long way. So I mentioned that it isn't about the camera that you use. It's basically how you use your camera and how you think about your camera. So we need to be thinking about what our camera can do rather than what it can't do. A lot of people don't go out filming at all because they think that their camera, whether it's on a phone or whether it's an action camera or whatever, they sometimes think it's not good enough, so they don't go out and film at all. But you can still have a cinematic mindset no matter what kind of device you're using. You just need to understand what it's good at and play to those advantages rather than thinking about what it can't do all the time. But even if your camera is small, like the GoPro Mission 1 Pro, you can start thinking about it in a different way. You can think about it like a big camera. Don't think of it like a small camera. You know, it's very portable, it's easy to carry around, but in terms of how you use it, if you think about it more in terms of what it would be like as a big camera, that can also help your mindset in the way that you're filming and take you away from that idea of using it as an action camera just because it's small and light, rather than getting those shots which can be termed more cinematic. And I'm going to keep using the Dr. Evil style inverted commas because I really don't like that phrase, as I mentioned. So what does the Mission 1 Pro do well? Well, it is small and light and it is very portable, and the battery life on it is really good too. So it's great for traveling around with and not having to worry about power issues. It can survive the environment as well. So even if you get caught out in inclement weather or you want to place it in a slightly risky situation, it can also deal with that. And that's something that you don't get with mirrorless cameras or more expensive devices like the gimbal cameras, for example. It also means that it can be mounted in creative ways as well. And you can really think about unusual angles to get that you probably wouldn't be able to get with other types of camera. On top of that, it also has wide dynamic range thanks to GP-Log2 and its dual gain output capability, which is something that you normally only find on higher end cameras like the Arri Alexa, and I believe the new Sony FX5 has it as well now. So what doesn't it do well? Well, it's not very good at close focus because it has that 1-inch sensor and there has to be a compromise somewhere. So things that are close to the lens go out of focus. We don't have control over the depth of field. It doesn't have an iris on it. So this is seen as a bit of a negative, but in fact, we can take that disadvantage or those disadvantages and turn them to our benefit in terms of getting shots that are more cinematic. So that's another thing to consider no matter what camera you use, as I mentioned earlier, is looking at the disadvantages of the camera and seeing whether those can be turned around into something that is of benefit to you rather than a disadvantage. So the limited close focusing ability of the Mission 1 Pro allows us to control the appearance of depth in the image. We can use it to our advantage. So we can place a camera in positions where it's looking through things, or it has some kind of foreground element that we can keep out of focus and hence create that depth in the shot. And that's something that I strive to do in a lot of the shots in the montage that I created. We can also use the 2x digital zoom on the camera, and this is effectively lossless because it is cropping in on a very high resolution sensor, and this will exacerbate any of that depth of field effect from the out of focus objects that are closer to the camera and therefore give more depth to the image even further. There are a few caveats though when you use the 2x zoom on the Mission 1 Pro. The first is that because it is zooming into the high resolution sensor, it's effectively pixel for pixel, which means that it can't use the quad Bayer layout to use the dual gain output, and therefore you do lose dynamic range by quite a substantial degree in the highlights. And when you use both 8K modes and the 2x zoom, you can see on this example image that I've got here, this was taken with the same exposure. One was taken with the 2x zoom and the other was taken with the 1x zoom, i.e. fully wide. And you can see how the dual gain output in the full wide gives a huge amount more dynamic range and highlight information than the 2x zoom does. But we can compensate for that with our exposure. We can dial it down. We might get a little less in the shadows. But for me, using the 2x zoom, which is something that I used throughout this montage, makes it look less like an action camera. By using that 2x zoom, you lose that action camera look. And that's something that I strived for when making this. If I'd have kept it fully wide, it would have been very obvious that it was some sort of action camera, but using 2x zoom gets rid of that effect, even though you lose a bit of dynamic range in the process. Something else that is important to lose that action camera look is to put the digital lens setting to the linear setting. That gets rid of any of the fisheye distortion effect. Now, with regard to the sharpness of the camera, using the 2x zoom, it does look a little bit soft sometimes, but I know a lot of people don't like the softness of the Mission 1 Pro with the detail set to low. For me, I actually really like that kind of smooth, creamy smooth filmic look. I don't like the over sharp look of in-camera sharpening, but if you're not confident with your ability to add the sharpness back in post, I'd recommend setting the camera to the medium sharpness setting to give you peace of mind. That gives you a nicely sharp image straight out of the camera without going too over the top. But for me, I set it to low because I prefer that smoother filmic-like look. It's not less detailed, it's just a smoother image for me. In terms of setting the camera up for shots, so like I said, we need to be looking at unusual angles, looking through objects, and experimenting with different heights as well. So in the course of making this video, I had two other cameras that I was testing at the time. So my focus was a little bit distracted, and there were some shots that I wish I'd have got a bit more creative with. This shot where I walk past the camera, I come into the shot from the left-hand side and exit on the right. In hindsight, I think I would have been better, setting the camera up, taking advantage of the fact that the camera is waterproof, and putting it in the sea itself, looking back at the beach, maybe putting it low down to the water surface. There was no surf on that day, so the sea was pretty calm, and I think that might have made a better looking shot, but you know, hindsight is a wonderful thing. But throughout taking all of these shots, and something to bear in mind in your own production is what you're going to do story-wise. So this video was originally going to be a sort of homage to my partner Emily, who passed away a few years ago from cancer. It got a bit too much. I did a voiceover for it and it was working, but it was a bit too much for me emotionally, so I turned it into more of a montage set to music and using the environmental sounds. But the same overall editing style was still the same as what I had originally visualized. But it's important to note that it isn't just me on my own walking past the camera or going into different places. I've got my dog Dolly, who is my companion. She goes with me pretty much everywhere. And so there is a little bit of a story in there. It's not just me isolated on my own walking around any old place. There is a little bit of a sort of story in there, even if it's a subtle one. And again, that's something to bear in mind when you're trying to make something that is a little bit more than just your average travel video or vlog. Now, some people like to get their sort of cinematic look by moving the camera. And with regard to any kind of story or narrative elements, even if it's documenting real life, if you want to move the camera, I would suggest making it motivated. I think if you can get a good looking shot from a static point of view, start from that point of view, then you can look at moving the camera, but only if it's motivated. Is it some sort of reveal? Does it have any bearing or show anything to the video that you couldn't really illustrate as well with a static shot? That's something that is part of cinematography. It's something about when you make narrative films. When you move the camera, generally you're doing it for a narrative purpose. It's not just there for the sake of it. It's not just there just for eye candy. So if you're going to move the camera, see if you can think about ways in which that can be done that actually add some element to what you're trying to show your audience. Make it motivated. So when it comes to mounts and things of that nature, I try to keep things very simple and straightforward. I don't want to carry around a load of things in a backpack. I want to keep things very simple and straightforward, but there are a few essential things that I've found when I've been filming outdoors that have made my life a lot easier. Now, one of the products that I use a lot is this selfie stick tripod from Small Rig. I take this pretty much everywhere. I mentioned it in one of my previous videos. It can extend as a short selfie stick like that, and it's got a ball head as well, and it's got these tripod legs for putting on a hard surface. The other thing I like about this is this hook that extends out here, and you can hang this on fences and other objects if there's not a place that you can put it on the ground or use any other way of getting the camera position. And it will also sort of fold up nicely. It's very lightweight indeed, and it's got this clip here as well, so you can hang this on like a strap of some kind to easily carry it around. But it's very lightweight, and I generally tend to take this pretty much everywhere I go. But for the static shots that I used in a lot of the montage that I made the other day, I use a standard selfie stick. This is the GoPro one, but you can use any sort of selfie stick that goes up to a certain height. And what I do is I put I think it's called a camping spike. I don't know if that's what it's called. Anyway, it's a 7-inch one, and it's got a 1/4-inch thread on the bottom of it. And this goes into the end of the tripod, and then it sticks into the ground. There are some limitations. Sometimes you come across surfaces that have got rock in them, and it's hard to get it all the way down. But if you can get all the way up here, then it makes a really sturdy mounting system. If you can't get it all the way in, then wind can still affect it. I did have that in a few shots during this montage. The final shot in particular, it was really blowing quite strongly and I couldn't get this all the way into the ground, but this is still way more reliable in those outdoor situations than using a mini tripod. If I'm in an urban environment or a place where there are flat surfaces, or I'm going to be on rocks, say at the end of a beach, then I will screw tripod feet into the bottom of the selfie stick. Something to be really careful of though, if you're going to be using this, is when you're carrying it around in public, because members of the public can be a little bit stupid. Even if you've got the camera mounted on the end, they won't see that. They just see a long stick which looks like a baton with a great big ninja looking spike thing sticking out of the back of it. So, use your common sense when you're carrying this around in public. I tend to unscrew it and put this in my pocket if I'm walking between places, if I know I'm going to see other members of the public, because it can look like a weapon, and people generally are a bit silly these days, and like I said, they will often miss the fact you've got a camera on the end of it. But for outdoors situations, out on coastal paths and sort of mountain areas and whatever, this is really fast to deploy, just way quicker, way more convenient than using tripod feet. I've got a link to all of these mounts, by the way. They are affiliate links in my description below and the comment section. So it really does support the channel if you are thinking of buying any of this stuff, if you go through those links. I don't hawk a lot of products like that, but these are the things that I use all the time. Another really essential accessory for this is ball head mount. This is the one from GoPro, but I put a link to an all metal one in my links. This is absolutely essential if you're going to use any kind of selfie stick with a tripod on the bottom of it. I've got my quick release mount here so I can easily take the camera on and off, but you need this ball head to be able to level your camera off no matter what surface you're on. One of the days when I was in St David's, I lost it. I forgot where I'd put it. And I was cursing myself the entire time, because it just was such a lifesaver as this when you're filming. Even if you think you've got a flat surface, this just allows precise positioning of the camera rather than having to reposition the selfie stick all the time. So that is really, really an essential accessory if you're going to be using this type of mounting method. Okay, so let's talk about the camera settings. I want to give a bit of a caveat here. If you're not that technically minded, or you're not as confident with the very highly technical nature of some aspects of camera setup, don't let that put you off experimenting with shots. You can still get a cinematic looking video even without the stuff I'm about to talk about. I don't want you to get bogged down in the technicals, but if you are into the technicals of the camera, then by all means follow what I'm about to say. So as I mentioned earlier, I do have the camera set to the low sharpness setting, and that effectively turns all digital edge enhancement off, and I like that creamy smooth look. I know a lot of you think it looks soft. I don't agree. I just think it looks nice and smooth and more filmic, and I dial back that sharpness and texture in my grade. But as I mentioned earlier, if you're not confident with your grading and you just want the camera to look nicely sharp out of the box, then put the camera into the medium sharpness setting, and that gets you a good look right off the bat. I use GP Log 2 for my filming because I know that I'm going to be grading. You don't have to. You can use one of the other standard modes if you want, such as a cinematic setting. I use GP Log 2 because in my editing, I know that I can convert it to the ARRI Alexa color space. And you can see from this example here the difference between using the GoPro cinematic style profile. This is actually a LUT that was produced by GoPro to make GP Log 2 look like the cinematic profile in the camera. Compare that to the ARRI Alexa converted color space, and you can see a big difference, particularly when it comes to the skin tones. The GoPro LUT just looks a bit plastic. It's not great when you compare it to the ARRI one, and I just think this gives a better overall look to the footage once it's graded and edited. So how do I convert the Mission 1 Pro to the ARRI color science? Well, I use a plugin which I've mentioned many times before in previous videos, and that is Cinematch by Film Convert. For me, it is an essential plugin to have for Resolve, and it works in other editors as well. So when it comes to exposure, for locked off shots like I was using during this particular montage, I used a fixed and locked exposure. So in order to do this, you hold down your finger on the LCD screen on the camera and you guide the spot meter to where you want it to expose for, and then you tap again and that will lock the exposure. So if you were doing a walk by, the camera isn't going to adjust the exposure as you walk past the camera, it's just going to say locked, and it's just going to stop that exposure changing mid-shot. For example, if you walk in front of the camera, cutting off light to it, the camera isn't just suddenly going to change that exposure. So locking it off is the way to go. So on shots such as during sunset, if you leave the camera to its own devices, then you can end up with under or overexposed areas of the image. So this is another reason why I want to use the locked exposure. I want to be able to select the sunset so I don't lose any of those wonderful colours. The trouble is that when you've exposed for that sunset, your foreground is now going to be very dark or completely underexposed. But what we can do is we can use the exposure compensation function within the locked exposure screen, and we can compensate for that by bringing it up a stop or even 2 stops just to bring that foreground back into exposure. Relating to exposure, I have the GoPro Labs firmware installed on the camera, and that's because it allows me to enable the histogram, which gives me a good overview of what the exposure is doing. So I can see if any particular parts of the image are either completely overexposed or completely underexposed, and I can adjust for that. And the histogram is completely customizable within the lab setup. You can select its position on the screen and its size as well. And that's a really useful function to have that isn't available in the standard firmware. Now, did I use NDs or not? In this particular shoot, I didn't use NDs because I was distracted by having to test and get footage with 2 other cameras as well. I didn't want the extra faff of ND filters. But while I'm normally against using ND filters with an action camera because I'm using it in adventure style scenarios where the lighting is changing all the time and that sort of thing, in this sort of situation where I've got locked off shots, this is exactly where I would normally use ND filters on an action camera. And that will allow you to lock your shutter speed and your ISO, and you'll get that natural motion blur without having to add it in post. I added the motion blur on this particular edit in post. I used the motion blur function within Resolve, and I used the metal setting, which really gives a very realistic motion blur. And it works astoundingly well on static shots like the ones that I took for this montage. But if I used ND filters, I would save all that processing overhead because the motion blur filter is quite processor intensive. So ordinarily, on this kind of shoot, using this kind of camera with the static shots, I would use ND filters. So it's one of the few cases where I would do so. Now with white balance, I use a fixed white balance. Again, I don't want the white balance changing mid-shot. So for most of the shots in the video, I use 5600K, which is a pretty standard daytime white balance. You can vary this at sunset, experiment with it to see if you can bring out the colours more, but generally I left it at 5600K for the most part during the filming for this. And, like I said, that stops it from varying throughout the shot. One thing I would say is that it's better to err on the side of an image that looks slightly warm rather than an image that looks slightly cool. And that's because it's easier to bring an image that is too red back into range than it is to bring an image that is way too cool. And that's just because of the way that the RGB gain system works in cameras. Now, lastly, we come to audio, and audio is extremely important when it comes to making a cinematic video. Now, I always make sure I record location audio, and for this particular video, I used the Insta360 Mic Pro, and I've got to say that these devices now are absolutely fantastic. I used to have a Zoom recorder, which is a big bulky thing that you used to have to carry around to record location audio. this is fantastic. Even if you don't have an Insta360 camera, you can use this as your field recorder. It records 32-bit float and it can do it in stereo. It's the only device I know of, particularly of this size, that can record stereo 32-bit float audio, which is absolutely amazing for environments like the sea and that sort of thing. So I recorded a lot of audio with that, and also incidental sounds like footsteps and gate locks and that sort of thing that you don't get when you just put the microphone from the camera's position. You want to make sure you get all sorts of different audio that you can use in your editing to really sort of bring things out and give things a bit more impact and feeling. You can also use the DJI Mic 3 or Mic 2, and that will also record 32-bit float as well. And I think the new Mic Mini 2S from DJI also does 32-bit float recording as well. So there's a choice of devices you can get, but the Insta360 one is the only one that can do the 32-bit float in stereo. So that makes it a really nice device just to have in your pocket, just for general recording. It's a really versatile little thing to have, and it doesn't really break the bank either. So it's very affordable. Okay, so that is the camera side of things. Next time I'm going to talk about the editing and the grading. If you've made it this far, then please do drop a like. And if you're not already subscribed, please do consider subscribing to the channel and hitting the notification icon so that you get notified of any new content that I put out. And like I said, I do have some affiliate links for the products I've highlighted during this video. So if you do want to get any of those, then I'd really appreciate it if you use them. It really does help out the channel and literally helps keep the lights on here. So I really appreciate that. But yeah, that's it for now, and I will catch you all in the next video.